I want to quickly move to another question. When the committee decided to bring you back, multiple former employees reached out to my office to discuss their mistreatment while working at the CBC. Not one of the many people that reached out to me was willing to speak on the record due to the use and abuse of non-disclosure agreements and non-disparagement agreements, that especially when it comes to harassment. Agreements that we've been told CBC requires employees to sign before they would even investigate. As a result, I'll have to be somewhat vague in order to protect the identities of the people that reached out. Each person that reached out were recognized as excelling in their field. Not one of them had a good thing to say about how their time at the CBC ended. They all said that things got worse since you took over. Many of them mentioned directly appraising you of the situation, but nothing changed. Can you describe CBC's policies on non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements? And are you aware of instances where the CBC has investigated a claim of harassment where the CBC did not rely on a non-disclosure or non-disparaging agreement before starting the investigation?
If I may just start, I will have to ask Marco Dubé to get into the details, because I do not get involved, obviously, in direct personnel matters. But I am deeply disturbed by what you are saying, and I will absolutely take it to heart. This is news to me, and so I will certainly take it very seriously. But maybe Marco can answer the questions.
And just to reiterate, what we are looking for is the CBC aware of an investigation of a claim of harassment where CBC did not rely on the use of a non-disclosure or non-disparagement agreement before starting the investigation? And I will say, Ms. Tate, we are aware of instances where former employees did raise this directly with you years ago, and nothing was done.
Thank you for your question.
38 seconds.
Yeah, so I'll simplify and summarize. We take very seriously all allegations of harassment and violence in the workplace. We assess those claims. We investigate those claims with external investigators. There are rules around those investigations that are regulated, and there's a law actually that we have to follow in the labor code, and we do all of that respectfully, and we try along the way to protect the victims of those events, and certainly we try to protect along the way the confidentiality of people.
Where an NDA was not used in investigating harassment? That's the question I asked.
I'm sorry. It's now up. And now go to Ms. Ashton. Nikki, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. One of the messages that I received, anonymous messages that I received, refers to the use of NDAs by the CBC as, quote, an ironclad policy that is enforced by CBC's legal department, unquote. One of the cases, one of the people that reached out was a journalist who was dealing with a trauma-related injury as a result of the type of stories they were being asked to cover. After taking a pause from their job to heal, they returned to work with a request for accommodation, something CBC was unwilling to accommodate. CBC eventually fired them, beginning a long fight for compensation. CBC refused to take responsibility for the injury. Not only that, despite CBC saying they couldn't do their job, CBC management reached out to their insurance provider to get their benefits canceled, saying they could do their job. This person felt this was retribution, and it's hard to imagine otherwise. Under your leadership, Ms. Tate, is it CBC's policy to punish employees who were disabled on the job and spoke out?
Absolutely not.
And yet this person went through this situation, and your corporation not only fired them, canceled their compensation. No, that's okay. I think the fact that this case exists is very problematic on the reputation of the CBC. I would say another case was an example of the CBC targeting an employee who required specific accommodations for their disability, yet CBC refused despite the fact that this would be a contributing factor to their disability. This employee made clear they felt that this was punitive and retaliatory. CBC was unwilling to make accommodations in that case. NDAs were used. I also want to bring up the fact that the BBC, as a matter of policy, stopped using NDAs in 2014 following its clear abuse to cover up for Jimmy Savile's pedophilia. Has the CBC discussed eliminating the usage of NDAs to stop silencing employment complaints, including on cases of harassment?
Ask Marco to answer that question.
Yes, thank you for your question, Madam Chair. I think the MP's misinformed. We don't comment specific HR files, but I don't think the MP is conveying information that's completely accurate. And since it is anonymous information, it's very hard for us to be able to respond in a specific way. What I will say is that we take all allegations very seriously.
We are talking about the rampant usage of NDAs, and you have said nothing that refers to that reality. I am not misinformed. I would appreciate an answer on that.
So I'm going to the Liberal. Go to Ms. Ashton. Nikki, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I want to begin by taking issue with Mr. Dubé's comment about being misinformed. I think it's indicative of the arrogance of the CBC and clearly based on very vulnerable stories that were shared to us by your employers. I think it's also insulting. You have an NDA problem. We know that the BBC banned the use of NDAs in 2014. My question to you, Ms. Tate, as the leader of this organization, why isn't CBC doing the same?
I will look into what you're describing as the NDA problem. I'm not aware of this being a problem. What I will say to you is that we are leaders in the efforts for well-being and support to our employees. During a very, very difficult time during the pandemic, as you well know, there was a great social justice outcry. We launched an anti-harassment and anti-racism platform for people to be able to anonymously declare any concerns they might have. We've done a lot of work in this area, and I'm very proud of that work.
I want to pick up on that exact point. And first of all, I want to be clear. We're talking about the use of NDAs prior to investigations, forcing employees to sign an NDA before their case is investigated. That's what we're hearing is happening at the CBC, which is unacceptable. I want to bring up a case. A journalist who had written a number of articles about discrimination as part of their work experienced that same discrimination and harassment themselves. They complained to CBC, and CBC said they wouldn't investigate the case until they signed a non-disclosure agreement. They refused, and their claim was investigated without their participation. The investigation was eventually closed without a resolution. This person went and found additional income during that time so they could be able to afford to pay their bills while their harassment case was being dealt with, and as a result, CBC fired them. Once again, a culture of retribution and a reliance on non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements to silence people whose only issue was that they didn't want to take CBC's abuse lying down. It's embarrassing, and it shouldn't be happening. C-65 mandated that harassment investigations must take place in a timely manner. Delaying an investigation until which time an NDA is signed is a flagrant contravention of that law. Do you find that unacceptable, or do you find this practice acceptable?
We are in full compliance with that law. And if I may say, all indication from our annual Gallup polls is that the healthy environment for the majority of our employees is very much intact. We've seen higher engagement scores over the last 6 years. And I am enormously proud of the support that we've provided. Our work on online harassment of our journalists, our work on all sorts of benefits, and most recently in our collective agreements with the Canada Media Guild, extending benefits for example, for Indigenous employees. We've done an enormous amount of work.
We're going to have to wrap that up. We've gone well over time. 2.5 minutes, please, Nikki.
Madam Tate, I want to begin by saying that during the testimony, we heard from one of the whistleblowers that they, in fact, did speak to you personally about the abuse of NDAs, including in their case. So I understand it is an issue that has been raised with you. I want to share an excerpt from an anonymous employee who wrote, "It is anathema to what CBC rightly expects from its journalists: transparency, accountability, and fairness. The CBC actually uses public funds to pay private lawyers to insulate its legal department from the burden of grinding down its own employees through this abusive process. Someone needs to ask Ms. Tate on the record about the extent of CBC's practice to demand NDAs and other ganging devices such as non-disparagement clauses when settling with employees who have well-founded and proven claims of abuse." end quote. And I will also add to that the whistleblower's statement that another whistleblower statement that they were told that they had to sign an NDA in order for their case to be investigated. These are chilling stories for any media organization, but I would say it is wildly unacceptable for our state broadcaster to be running the show like this. It is wildly unacceptable for the CBC that is publicly funded, built by Canadians, to be able to be treating its employees like this. What we've heard today is how, under your leadership and under the current CBC reality, our national broadcaster, perhaps paralyzed by fear of right-wing attacks, is making poor choice after poor choice. The doling out of exorbitant executive bonuses is unacceptable at a time when we've seen cuts, layoffs, and of course, Canadians are going through such a difficult time. The crushing of all internal complaints through the abuse of non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements and the mass firings of workers in your organization are unacceptable. CBC is increasingly resembling the Bells of this world, and Canadians will not stand for it.
24 seconds.
For a federally funded journalism organization to abuse journalists, spend public funds on high-powered lawyers to find them, and then gag them through NDAs is unacceptable. Canadians deserve better. CBC employees deserve better. Canadian communities deserve better. We all deserve better.